For many, the phrase property rights evokes images of exclusion, walled estates, and legal barriers designed to help corporations and the wealthy hoard resources while keeping everyone else at a distance. However, a different pattern emerges when we look at the populations suffering the most severe human rights abuses globally. Whether they are refugees, marginalized minorities, or the extreme poor, the common denominator of their vulnerability is a total lack of legally protected property. Early human rights advocates recognized that survival depends on the ability to own and control one's environment. In the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, they placed property rights on the same level as the right to life and the freedom of religion. Without these rights, an individual exists in a state of juridical limbo. If you do not own the space you occupy or the tools you use for your trade, you must rely entirely on the permission of an authority figure to act, to live, or to speak. Property rights act as the mechanical infrastructure required for civil liberties to function. They provide the physical and legal secure zone from which an individual can exercise their other rights without fear of immediate retaliation or displacement. Attempting to build a society that protects free speech and association without first securing universal property rights is a structural impossibility. All property begins with the human body. The baseline of personal agency is the recognition that you own yourself, your physical presence, the energy you expend, and the labor you produce. This physical ownership is the source of our concept of privacy. Privacy is the recognition that an individual belongs to themselves, rather than to the state or the collective. Because you belong to yourself, you can labor, experiment, and generate ideas within your own private sphere. You do not require a permission slip from an authority to change your mind or test a new way of living. When humans apply their labor to the world, they produce value that can be traded. Money is the language we use to communicate that value, a ledger that records the time and effort we have expended. When an authority monitors or intercepts the flow of that value, they are not just looking at numbers, they are monitoring the record of our personal actions. The ability to freeze assets or block a trade gives an institution a functional veto over the individual behaviors that produced that value. This control effectively silences the individual. Regardless of what the law claims, your freedom of speech is non-existent if a central authority can arbitrarily cut off access to the capital required to participate in society. Shifting to the societal level, the absence of clear property boundaries leads to chaos. Historically, when individuals lack a formal system to settle claims, they often fall into cycles of retributive violence and blood feuds over debts that can never be settled. Clear, mutually recognized property boundaries disincentivize this violence. They replace physical force with a set of predictable rules that allow people to associate and trade voluntarily. However, when the power to define these boundaries is centralized, it invites regulatory capture. Powerful interests can lobby the state to change the rules in their favor, using the law to block certain groups from developing land or accessing the economy. This centralized bottleneck creates a mechanism for systemic discrimination. By controlling the gate, an authority can legally lock the young, the poor, and minorities out of property ownership. A decentralized system of rights removes this gatekeeper, stripping the state of its power to exclude people based on their race, gender, or social status. Universal, bottom-up property rights ensure that ownership is a fact established by the individual's own actions and agreements, rather than a privilege granted or withheld by a central office. We do not achieve a non-discriminatory society by finding better central planners, but by removing the center's ability to dictate who is allowed to own and participate. Property rights represent a system of mutual recognition between human beings. It is a shared agreement that establishes where one person's agency ends and another's begins. This recognition is the primary historical mechanism used to legally limit the overreach of absolute authority. By codifying property rights, our ancestors created a tool that forced even kings to respect the belongings and the space of the individual. This remains a critical battle today. Whether it is securing land rights for displaced refugees or expanding microfinance for women, establishing recognized property is the first step in granting vulnerable people the autonomy they need to survive. A just society must be allowed to grow from the bottom up, emerging from the honest interactions of a community rather than being dictated from above. To protect the freedom of speech, to dismantle systemic discrimination, and to allow for true human flourishing, we must defend the ultimate foundation, the right to own your life, your labor, and your property.